Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Mosaic Podcast. Today, I've got another person, and I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, but one of the most enjoyable things about doing this podcast is you meet people through other people who you never knew before, but in a moment, you know the reason why you're connected. And we had a little conversation in the green room here before we came on. And Philip told me about something that we're going to do, and I'm not going to tell it to you because he'll tell it to you a little bit better than I will for sure. But this man is an interesting man. And what he's given me permission to do in this conversation is go beyond the space where most people get to talk to him at. Go beyond the person that he shows on his on his website and in his talks. I want to get to the place where he's a vulnerable human being, just like you and me, where we're not talking about work as much as we're talking about human beings, because I think in the coming together of the human experience, we experience an experience that is so much greater than anything we know. And we realize we're not alone in this experience. And we realize that we walk together with people doing all sorts of things. I found out about Philip in a conversation with a guy, Srinivas Rao, who is the mastermind and genius mind behind the Unmistakable Creative podcast. Philip's been a guest on his podcast several times, and so have I, and I've been once. And Philip and I will be taking part in a completely unique conference Sriniv's going to be doing in Nashville, Tennessee. And in speaking with Srini about the conference, he told me he was trying to decide who should close up the conference, me or Philip. And he said, Philip is one of the most dynamic speakers in the whole world. And he's thinking maybe he didn't know who he should put. And I said, whoever you put, I don't care, but I want to meet this guy. So I reached out to him before the conference to have him on the podcast, just because I wanted to get to know who he was. I'm not a big bio guy. You can read all this on his website, but let me give you an idea for the podcast a little bit. Philip works with entrepreneurs and business leaders all over the world. And it seems like when people are seeking clarity about their future or want to move through roadblocks, seen or unseen, they call him. What separates him from the lot of coaches and speakers and gurus is his originality. He brings new conversations to the table and spends an obscene amount of time thinking and challenging the status quo instead of simply repackaging business and life hacking strategies. He says something on his website that really intrigued me, that 90% of the people don't know where they're going. He works with the 10% who do. So it's with sheer joy and pleasure that, Philip, I welcome you to the Mosaic Podcast, and I say thank you for joining us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So it's my pleasure. What I like to do in the podcast is sort of give a picture of where you come from and how you got to where you're doing, but in a different way. When you were growing up, what did your parents do?
My dad was a sales guy. He worked for a drinks company. So they distributed alcohol and they made kind of pop and soft drinks. So he was a manager and then a senior director in a drinks company. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And I often feel that my mother's, it wasn't that she wasted her life. She dedicated so much of who she was to us, but she certainly didn't necessarily honor a lot of her individual gifts in the world.
Wow. And so I can already start to piece together from what you said, but I don't want to piece together. Like, I want you to fill in those places for me. Who influenced you the most in doing what you're doing? Was it your dad's drive to get things going? Or was it the fact that you watched your mom have all these skills and all these talents and just leave them unchecked?
Yeah, and again, I'm not worried about sounding disrespectful to my mother. I love my mother to pieces, and she's amazing. But she's definitely one of the most intuitively gifted people I've ever met, and yet I don't believe she really honored that a lot. She gave everything away. I remember, Christmas Eve, if my dad worked Christmas Eve, which most likely he did, he'd come back with a massive hamper, basket this size, a big basket full of all different foods and sweets and everything else. And I had two brothers, and I'd say 2 hours after it came back, it was gone. Most people assume that it was consumed. It was given away. So my mother is probably the most generous person I've ever met in this world. She inherited like a small amount of money when somebody passed away, and I think within 2 days it was all gone. In other words, she gave it all away. But I think to the point where she gave it away because she didn't value who she was. It wasn't just a generosity thing. And she has her own story, and she had, she was sexually abused by a priest in Ireland. I think that massively affected her confidence. There was nowhere to talk about that. So I feel that in some way, shape, or form, I think one of the greatest tragedies and biggest fears I would have in the world would be to walk down the street, to walk around the corner, to walk over a hill, and to bump into the person that I could have been. And I feel in some way, shape, or form, if I look back with respect to my dad, I think my mother is driving a lot more of my desire to make sure that my gifts are seen in this world, or at least experiment in this world, and to make sure that the men and women that come across my door in a coaching or retreat capacity or whatever, that I work really hard to make sure that the essence of them emerges into this world, that they don't die 50 years or 100 years from now saying, shit, I could have been different, I could have done this, I could have said that, I could have written that book, I could have wrote that piece of music, I could have painted that piece of art. Because some of the greatest artists have died with the greatest piece of art still inside of them, and that to me is a tragedy to them and to the universe.
Yeah. So like there's so much in there that I'd like to unpack because there's a part of me that says the world will bring out of us what we need, what it needs to bring out. And if we're not ready yet to have that happen, then it's okay. It's completely okay, because the amount of angst we live in, like we live in a world where everybody's trying to be extraordinary, where everybody's trying to get it all done, where everybody's trying to to get that last breath out of them that has all their music in them, do it before they die, right? And what I don't know if you come across this too, but I come across a lot of people that are in neurotic messes because they're trying so hard to be who the exceptional part of themselves that they don't really just enjoy and love the ordinariness. And there's a part of me that's really like you. I know you all of about 14 seconds now, and I know I don't know your mom at all except for the 3 seconds that you've told me about her, right? But there's a part of me that says, look at the world we live in, where someone who has a kindness of heart to just give everything of themselves for other people is not maybe that is her magic. Maybe that is her gift. And how do you determine if a gift of kindness, of just being in service of other people in a quiet way, is not as valuable as being in service to people in a loud way?
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's not as I'm not judging in terms of its value necessarily. What I do see is I see the repercussions of that. And by the way, that frenetic energy that I see people, trying so hard to try and uncover all of themselves and all of their potential and their greatest piece of music, that's a complete waste of time, because I did that for years and I was completely miserable.
Yeah,
it's like anything in life. You chase anything in life, it typically runs the other way, whether it's a woman or a man or a tiger. Well, tigers will typically turn and eat you up. So typically though, anything you chase aggressively will move away from you. That energy, you're actually pushing that away from yourself. I just feel that when I look at my mother now in her later stages of life, her body is breaking down. She has allowed herself to live with a tremendous amount of pain. She's never looked after herself. So I feel that that's where I'm starting to see that the cost of this, that there's something she didn't honor within herself. And I'm not talking about chasing it. I'm just talking allowing it to emerge in a different way. She's got a deep love for animals, and she's always talked about just, sheltering animals and looking after them, but she didn't execute on that.
Yeah.
And I think there's sometimes there's this place where, yes, you allow the world to bring out the parts of you, but then I think there's another area where you have to nudge it a little bit. You have to push it to a little bit of an edge, and experiment. Experiment with what's possible in your own life and run the risk of failing. I think we'd often rather fail at doing something we don't want to do in this world than run the risk of actually bringing the part of us out into the world that is the essence of who we are, because we're afraid that'll be judged or that'll be put down or may not work.
So sit there for a minute, because huge realization for people. And as people are listening right now, I want you to think about just what Philip is saying. Are you living a life where you are succeeding or failing at who you are not, so you don't have to look at actually who you are? and challenge yourself to be who you are, whether that's a passive who you are or an aggressive who you are, that's still up in the air for me, because I may disagree or agree, or we may be saying the same thing in different ways. Who cares? Um, but there's something so interesting, and I've heard you speak a little bit, and one of the concepts you talk about is this idea of allowing who you are to actually manifest. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think at a very young age, maybe back as certainly for me when I was 10 years old, I think I started wearing some sort of social masks on my face to fit in. And now I'm still at the ripe old age of 46, removing as many of those as I can, and I'll never remove all of those before I die. One of the things that I've seen emerge tremendously in the work that I do with people is, let's just say they're doing something today. There's a part of them that they're out of alignment in some capacity. They're living in a city they don't want to live in. They're in a relationship they don't want to be in. They're in a relationship with themselves that is not necessarily healthy. They're doing work which is not an extension or expression of who they are. In other words, they're going to work 7-8 hours a day doing something they don't want to do, but justifying and rationalizing to themselves that actually it pays the bills, it pays for the private school for the kids,
Totally.
it does
Totally.
whatever. And I'm not saying that that person is a social failure. I'm not saying that person is wrong. What I'm saying is they just need to reevaluate their expectations in terms of their own fulfillment on this earth. Because you can't go and do something for 7-8 hours a day that is not an extension or expression of who you are, for it not to have a detrimental effect on your soul. And the second thing I see emerging is that when they come home and they drive in the driveway, if their wife or their husband or their kids are at home, the expectation from the lack of joy they get in the work they do gets lumped onto their kids and onto their wife or their husband, and they have to fill the gap for them, which is not what they signed up for. And two is they're not capable of doing that. So if you continue to do work that makes good money but you don't enjoy it, that's okay, cool, go for it. But just reevaluate the expectations you have, that why you're not fully fulfilled, why you're not happy, and so on and so forth.
So let me jump in, because there's a bunch of assumptions in there, and so what I want to do is remove some of those assumptions to talk to the places of where people do experience that, because there are some people that are doing what they're doing, and maybe they're not conscious, maybe they are conscious, maybe they've chosen to sacrifice what it is they want so they can take care of their family and do the things they want. And I would just put this caveat on it, that if you're doing something that is fulfilling you, you don't need to change at all. Like if you're happy doing the life that you're doing, and that is everything that Philip just described, but that brings such a joy out in you that you don't come home and wait for your family to give you joy. You're just able to give that joy back to them, even though you're doing something that you don't want to do, but you feel so proud of yourself for taking care of your family. Go for it. And if you don't have to challenge yourself, don't. But there will come a time in most of our lives, there seems to come a time where what we're doing stops bringing us the fulfillment that we hoped it would. And the question is, at that moment, do you have the courage to relook at your life? The reason why I love the image of a mosaic more than a jigsaw puzzle, and I wrote the book called The Mosaic, but the reason why I like the image of a mosaic is it's chaotic. You can put pieces wherever you want. A jigsaw puzzle, there's certain elegance that this piece has to go in this place. And when it goes in that place, it's so beautiful that the picture's shown perfectly. With a mosaic, your pieces can go wherever you want. So if you're finding you're connecting in life to places that don't bring you happiness, you can take your piece out. And if you're grouted in, you can break it. You can break the mosaic. It's made up of broken pieces anyway. And you can rearrange your piece to a place where life looks better for you, or the pieces around you support you, and the connections you make in your thoughts, your beliefs, your ideas, the people that surround you are more present. I think that's the place you're speaking out. Am I correct?
Yeah, but I think the one challenge for example, you go back to my mother, is this idea. I talked to an entrepreneur recently, just within the last week, and he goes, "But I'm making such an impact in the world, and I'm making an impact. I've got hundreds and hundreds of employees. I'm making an impact using my wealth to my family. So the fact that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing or don't love what I do, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, and that's fine now." But what happens as it compounds over a period of time? I don't agree with that. That is a sacrifice that he should make, because I feel that his kids are maybe looked after financially. Maybe they go to private schools. Maybe they sleep in a beautiful, bed. Maybe they have all the toys, but they don't get to see the essence of their father. In other words, they miss out on that relationship piece. They don't see that spirit in his eyes. They don't see that light in his eyes. But he's telling himself a story that this is okay. And the reason he's telling him that story is he doesn't like himself. He does not like himself. If I had to sum up my mother's greatest Achilles heel, she does not like herself. She hasn't liked herself for a very long time. And that, to me, we give ourselves what we feel we deserve within ourselves.
So let me ask you a very personal question.
Yeah.
Do you like yourself?
Way more than I used to. But
Okay.
if you want me to say yes or no.
You already answered.
Way more than I used to.
Right.
But there's still a part of me that absolutely I do not.
And so I so respect the honesty of that answer, because I think we live in a pandemic time where none of us like ourselves. I mean, we're getting better, and everybody can say I'm doing that way more, but I work with so many people and they talk about, well, like, I'm way better than I used to be. So great. That doesn't give you the opportunity to now rest and stabilize where you are, because you're 90% better than you were 110 years ago. Yep. What you got to do is you're in a new class of people where now you're in the 10% people that like themselves 90%. And you got to learn from that group of people how you can arrange and mix all those pieces. But I don't think because someone doesn't like a part of themselves, we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but no, I just want to make sure that people are not hearing that.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I just feel that we make a lot of sacrifices. And by the way, the story that this gentleman was saying, and I'm not going to use his name, so I can use the story. He said, by the way, I have all these people. I'm responsible for all of these people. So I have to keep doing what I'm doing. And if I didn't do what I do, these people, I would let them down. And I said, well, that's a great story. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, it's a great story if it's true. And he goes, what are you saying? What I'm saying is it's possible. I'm asking you to consider, is it possible that story, that narrative you're telling yourself, why it's heroic, and I can almost visualize you flying around with your cape and your big S and on your chest and everything else. And it's phenomenal. And it makes you feel good about yourself temporarily. What if it's bullshit? What if that story you're telling yourself isn't true? What happens if you actually walked away? What would happen if those people were happier? What would happen if your business actually exploded? What would happen if actually those things got better? Because what happens is that your significance is tied to this story that you're telling yourself.
Totally.
And then he looked at me and said, holy shit, I said, I've never thought about that.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the other side of this story as well. And that's my job, is to challenge that.
So I want to time out again for people. And I want to ask people that are listening, the story and the situation in this story is not the essential part of what I think Philip is saying. What I think Philip is saying more than anything else is, do we have the courage to look at the stories we tell ourselves? And do we have the courage to say, what if the stories we're telling ourselves are not true? And how would our life look just from the freedom of being able to put those stories down for a few minutes and see what might be true? I talk a lot about seeing what you can't see. And I don't know if you've ever seen that image of, in one way you look at the image and it looks like a young socialite, and the other way it looks like an old hag, but they're both in the same picture. It's classic, and most of us have seen it, and we can go back and forth and we see it now, and most of us see it. But there was a time when I saw it that I only saw the old hag, and someone said, well, do you see the other thing in the picture? I said, there's nothing else in the picture. There's just nothing there. And they said, well, no, there really is. And I said, well, what is it? They said, it's a socialite. I said, come on, there's no socialite there. There's an old hag, and I can show you. This is the way it looks. And they said, well, how about if I could show you a socialite in there? I said, go ahead, do it. And I couldn't see it until that moment of perception where I saw it. The story that I had made up of what was in that picture prevented me from seeing something else that was in the same picture. And I think that's the work that we do with people, is helping them to see that the same thing we're looking at can be seen entirely different if you just drop the story you're telling yourself, which is blocking you from seeing those things.
Where I see that most prevalent is in relationships. Myself and my husband have an amazing relationship. It's 10 out of 10. Myself and my kids are so close, it's unbelievable. And I find that every single human being I've ever worked with, of which now many, many thousands of people, that's just not the case. They have a great relationship, but it's not as good as they thought it was. And they're afraid to allow themselves to admit that perhaps it's not as great as they thought, because they've been holding on to this idea, and that it undermines them if they allow that truth to emerge. However, the reality is that if they can go from a 10 out of a 10 to realize actually it's only a 7 out of 10, which is still amazing in the world today, but now you've got some room to work on. And then you can start identifying what are the conversations you're avoiding? What are the things you need to apologize for? What are the things that you can allow that person to see in yourself, whether it's vulnerability or truth or whatever, and vice versa. And that's when it gets very magical. That's when the relationship takes a whole bump. And where we see this the most is when people are about to die. We see the little fable story. It's actually, I think it's a very true story of the guy who went to hospital to say goodbye to his father who was dying. And the doctor came out and said, it's time. He said, he's passing away now. He goes, no, it'll be another 2 or 3 days. It's time for the conversation. And the son says, what conversation? He said, well, the conversation you probably should have had 20 years ago. Yeah. Now, that's very arguably judgmental, that you should have had it 20 years ago, whatever. I just think that most of the things that we want lie on the other side of a conversation we're unwilling to have, either with ourselves or with somebody else.
Yeah, or we don't even know. Like, I want to take the judgment out of all that you're saying, because I know you don't mean it that way. Some of the times we're just not conscious enough to even know what the conversation is. We're so caught. We would have the conversation maybe if we knew that we could, but we don't even know that we can, because we live such rote lives. Let me change it a little bit, because it's getting a little teachy for me, which I don't mind, because you're a fabulous teacher and your stories are intoxicating and I could listen to them all day, and I love them. But I want to know more about you. What are you most scared of?
In the world in which I inhabit right now, becoming, too important in my own world, getting to the top of that pyramid and feeling that I have all the answers, being put on a pedestal by other people and allowing that to happen, and getting lost. I almost most of the speakers I meet in the speaking world and the world of personal growth, development, leadership, whatever you want to call that, set out with great intentions. And it might sound judgmental, but this is my experience. 95% of them end up getting into a place where they feel they have all the answers and they become very lost. And that will be one of my greatest fears.
How do you prevent yourself from having that happen?
I think being aware of the fact that there's constant slippage all the time. People keep saying to me, "Oh, you'll never. That's just not who you are." We're all capable of getting lost. So just constantly recognizing the fact that, and just assuming that there's natural slippage all the time. Number one. Number two is teaching my clients from the get-go not to put me on a pedestal. And number three is my wife, and continuing to allow her to cut me at my knees in a good supportive way, and grounding me. And also the biggest thing actually from a coaching standpoint is realizing that the greatest gurus in the world are the actual students, that they have all the wisdom. My job is just to create this environment for allow that wisdom to come out.
I was a director of business development at Hay House, a publishing company here in California. When I came, they were a $3 million company. When I left, we were doing $100 million a year in sales. I was responsible for bringing some of the best, most well-known self-help people into Hay House to be published. And I put on tours with them and took them all around the country and had groups of them speaking. And one of the things that I saw is that most people write the book they most need to read. Almost all of them did. And I remember looking at them and thinking the thing that's held me back in my life is looking at them and realizing when I discovered them, they were such beautiful people. They were innocent and humble and kind and good. And the more they spoke and the more people came up to them, and there were thousands of people that would come up to them that said, "Boy, you're so good, and you really changed my life, and you really did this." They started to believe the press clippings.
Yep.
And they started to take that as if that was the truth rather than the truth of who they knew they were.
Absolutely.
Which was just a humble servant that was there serving them, doing what they were doing. And I remember them coming to me, and many of them coming to me and saying, "How do I get out of this? You brought me into this. How do I get out of it?" And I said, I'm standing on the sidelines because I'm not quite sure yet. But I remember talking to one person and saying, I've watched that happen. And he said to me, if you ever see that happen to me, will you please do me a favor, bend me over and give me a big, sharp kick in my butt? And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, then bend over. And he said, no, I'm serious. I said, no, I am too. And from that moment on, he didn't talk to me for about 5 years until he came back to me and he said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it now, but I certainly was pissed off at you then.
Exactly.
And
somebody asked me recently, well, within the last 12 months, a well-known speaker, he said, what happens if that slippage? How do I identify it? And I said, it's already happening. He goes, you don't understand my question. I said, no, I do. You just don't like my answer.
Yeah.
You've got to make a natural assumption. It's already happening. It's happening now. And if you don't do that, it's not undermining you. It's not negative thinking. It's not judgment. It's just awareness rather than complacency. But I think that's a great example that man then wouldn't speak to you for 5 years.
Yeah. And so let me be straight up with you. I see that slippage happening in you right now. How do you check yourself on that? I mean, I know you said you have your wife that takes you out at the knees sometimes in a loving, kind way and holds you where you are. But you're getting to the place where people are starting to recognize you, even in this conversation. I'm watching you run to the safe place of telling stories about clients rather than the vulnerable place of saying, wow, something, I am sitting in that place and I'm scared. And I don't say that, I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm not saying that's what you feel. But how do you check yourself? Because we're all so brilliant. And there are people out there, just like I was out there for all this time, saying, I don't want to become a bigger asshole than I am, pardon my language, right? By starting to become too caught up in myself and too full of myself and too important for myself. I don't need to do that. I would rather, and it circles around to the conversation of your mom and your dad that we started off with. There's some people that don't step up to that because of this point right here. I was one of them. Until I realized it doesn't do any good to sacrifice to not be who I am, to try and protect who I am, right? So forget about your clients. I want you to look at me right here now and look at the people that are talking to you now and say, this is what I do.
Yeah, but I can't, you're asking me to forget about something. There is no Philip and work. There's just Philip McKernan. There's no work-life balance in my life. Everything is an expression of who I am. So with my kids, for example, the other night, we went glamping for the first time ever.
Cool.
And we went for a walk. I went for a walk. I'm not sure if this answers your question or it's
Let's see.
But bear with me. So we went for a walk up the hill with my little girl, Maggie, and we're walking down the hill, and I just turned around to her, and there was just a beautiful moment where the stars were shining, and I just said to her, I said, I said, sorry for not being perfect. And I just opened up about, my impatience around my daughter and my son. And sometimes, I get impatient because it just builds up, and I struggle as a dad. That's one of the biggest struggles I have. And she said, Dad, you are perfect. And she gave me the biggest kiss and the biggest hug. And I'm not sure it's the answer to your question, but I feel that the thing that I do with my children and clients, but I don't see my clients as clients. They're an extension of who I am, and my wife, is I allow people to see my vulnerability. I speak my truth. I share where I'm scared. I share where I'm failing. I share where I'm falling on my face. That is the only thing that I know how right now in my life to do that allows me to stay as grounded as I am. And by the way, I'm not the person to assess that. Everyone else has to assess that for me, because I don't believe I'm capable of assessing how much the slippage is happening or not, as the case may be.
So let me interrupt you, because this is what you do to people. And I don't mean, this is not a coaching session, and pardon me if I'm coming across that way, because I don't want to. I feel like this is such grist for the mill of where people are at. If you don't access yourself, I don't want to let you walk away with that thing unchecked by me. You can believe whatever you want, but I'm going to call BS on you there, because you are the only one that when you look in the mirror, you know what you see. Other people can tell you what they see. Other people can try and say, this is what I see. But most of those people will be wrong, because people are wrong most of the time. You may be wrong most of the time too, but you have a vested interest in making sure the person you are, I don't want to let you allow that responsibility to be who you are slip, at least not in this conversation. We may never talk again. And I don't, I don't blame you if you never want to talk to me again, because I don't mean to call you out, but this is what it is. To me, we stand in our place, and when we don't know ourselves and we don't take the time to check ourselves and check our egos at the door and remember everything people are saying, how glorious, how wonderful, how perfect that I can be that person, but at the same person, this is who I am, and this is what how I show up. I'm sorry for talk. Part of the question that I'm really asking is what the Mosaic taught me in writing it is that the people Mo went to when his parents died to show him heaven were not the typical people you would assume, the priests and the rabbis and the shamans and the priests and the gurus. They were common, ordinary people. They were the homeless man and the street worker and the gardener and the trash man. And I wondered, why am I writing about such ordinary people? And I realized we have this obsession in the world today to be extraordinary. When I ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being what you'd hate to be and 10 being what you'd want to be, where do you place ordinary? Let's do it with you. Where would you place ordinary?
I don't even place it.
Okay,
because
so
to me it doesn't exist. I'll tell you what's coming up for me right now. What's interesting is that one of the big tests for me is I pay, like a lot of people, this lip service to this idea of ego and placing my ego at the door and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it is talk, and a lot of it can be real. And it's very challenging to self-assess yourself, because your brain will manipulate and it'll justify and rationalize everything to death. I think where the rubber hit the road for me was when I created One Last Talk. One Last Talk, without getting into too much detail on it, was created so it would give everybody in the audience a voice. Everybody assumes, oh, One Last Talk is gurus standing on stage sharing their one last talk. No, 90% of the speakers are the men and women. They're the audience. They're the people that sit in the audience looking at the stage. We're now saying, okay, you have a story worth telling, and you may not value it, but we do. And I'll share a moment where I was extraordinarily proud of myself. And there's only probably 2 or 3 times in my entire life that I can actually say I sat back and I could actually feel this sense of pride. When I put, 6 or 7 people on a stage, I can't remember the number. And I would always finish the event by thanking the speakers and saying, ladies and gentlemen, that was One Last Talk. And of course, getting all the applause, standing ovations, applause, whatever it happens to be. On this occasion, it went from this conceptual, intellectual idea to this actual feeling that this one Last Talk is not about Philip McKernan. And what I did was I put the speakers on stage and I said, ladies and gentlemen, you're speakers. And they got the applause and the event was over and it was done. And I've created One Last Talk because of this very thing. Because I don't want to be the guy that is the front of house, the guy that's getting the applause, the guy that's getting the recognition. The whole essence of One Last Talk is built on. Now, I wrote the book about it and the methodology and everything else. And people say, can you sign the book? And I've refused to sign. And I will never sign a copy of that One Last Talk book, because it's not about me. It's about the men and women who give their one last talk. So that's a real life example of how I'm not just talking about this, I'm doing it. If that makes sense.
I know, and I think it's the place where we resonate. Probably, I resonate with almost everything you're saying. But if I were to go 3,000 feet up and I would look at our conversation, One Last Talk is where I resonate with you most, because I'm creating something called Mosaic Swarm, and the Mosaic Swarm is about giving voice back to the people who have no voice. And so I think in the place that we sit, though, we share something right there. Here's the place that I want to really challenge you on. And I appreciate you letting me challenge you, because this is going to sound incredibly egoic, but I rarely get somebody who has the mental capacity to stay with me in conversations that are here, and the experience to go with me in their own experience for the experiences that I've had, because I've had a lot of experiences, right? You are the person that's put on One Last Talk. You are the one that wrote that book. And as much as the book is about all these other people, what I find in life is when we resist what we've been given, it's as bad as when we marvel in it and egoically bathe ourselves in it. There is a place called humility that is not putting ourselves down or saying we're less than we are, nor putting ourselves up and saying we're more than we are, but just standing in the place where we are. You are a presence. Look, listen to me, brother. I can feel it from the moment you opened your mouth. You are a presence. You know that. You can't say, I don't want to be a presence and I want to be invisible.
No,
Because,
and I don't want that, and I never will be.
yeah. And so when you bring together the people who love what you're doing to introduce them to One Last Talk, those people are most likely there because of your influence and and knowing that if they follow, that what you're going to bring them is going to be of a high caliber something. And so how do you find the place? And this isn't just for you, this is for people that are listening.
Yeah.
How do you find the place where you don't cower away from what's come through you, nor do you engross yourself so deeply in it that you disappear? Or maybe we do want to disappear, but we just accept what's right in front of us. This is what we've done, and hasn't this been amazing? And I did write this book, and it's about these people, and I don't want to sign it, but I will sign it because I want my signature to be their signature, and every time you see them, my signature, you know it's their story. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise, it just, like, people come up and they want to love you and they want to give love to you and they want to buy this and they want a part of you with them, which is what the event is. And you say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel very, very comfortable in the whole not signing the book, but I don't shy away from the fact that One Last Talk came through me. I don't believe I created it. I think it came through me, and it came from a different place. My job is just to step out of the way enough to allow this thing to grow. So, for example, in Australia, where we're launching, in England, where we're launching, no one has any context to who Philip McKernan is. And that's new. And that's amazing to see people commenting on Facebook saying, thanks, Heidi, for bringing it to London. Thanks, Di, for bringing it to Adelaide. This is an amazing event. They even think that they created, I had a post on Facebook recently said, oh, this guy, Patrick Kenna designed or created One Last Talk. And I can sit back and chuckle with it. I don't feel the need to correct and say, no, it was Philip McKernan who created this. I don't have the answers to that. All I know is that we have One Last Talk local leaders in different parts of the world, different cities in North America and Canada, delivering the talks, and it's their event, and they're curating the talks, creating the speakers, but the speakers get the ownership of it. That's all I know. Me not signing the book is just a little nod. It's not, I don't think in any way, shape, or form, and people might disagree with this, I feel it's undermining me. I think it's just me, my way of acknowledging. I'd rather spend those 30 minutes rather than signing a book at an event, I'd rather spend those 30 minutes meeting people and engaging with them.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at One Last Talk, what do you want people to walk away with, knowing about you and knowing about the world they live in?
I don't want people to walk away knowing anything about me.
How come?
Because it's not about me. One Last Talk is almost nothing to do with me.
So
I want people to do one thing and one thing only. I want them to listen to somebody else's One Last Talk and to begin to imagine that their story matters. And if they can begin to believe that their story matters, that maybe they can find the courage to share their One Last Talk with one person minimum, or maybe 50 or maybe 100. And of course, the cycle continues. I don't want people to know about me with One Last Talk.
Okay. And why is it so important to you that people, what is One Last Talk? What's the meaning behind One Last Talk? Because why isn't it just one chance to talk, or one opportunity to speak, or why is it One Last Talk?
Because what it does, it pushes people to really, so if I gave you a letter and said, here's a piece of paper, write a letter. And you go, who's it to? I said, anybody. You'll write a letter. But I've done an exercise, and it's in the book, where people write their one last letter. And suddenly it's like, hang on a second, this is the last letter I'll ever get to write. Yeah, cool. It completely brings them to a different place.
Cool.
And it opens them up. And what ends up happening is they go, I literally had this the other day. Somebody just wrote, Dear Mom. She says, I can't stand my mother. I haven't talked to her for 40 years. And she goes, Dear, I found myself writing to my mother. And it was cathartic and therapeutic and mind-blowing and opening and emotional and everything else. So by creating the last, is that it creates a degree of, even though I hate the term, but a degree of urgency.
Yeah.
A degree of, you don't have the time to piss around and move around. And you can call it judgment, you can call it whatever you want. But when it's been proven so many times, as we say sorry, we forgive, we apologize, we say I love you, we say I adore you, we say the things that we often are on the peripheral when we're about to die. Everything about One Last Talk, One Last Book, One Last Conversation, all the new books I'm going to write around this are all about how do we bring those conversations forward in life,
Yeah.
and how do we begin to have them now rather than waiting 10 or 20 years to have them.
Love it. What have you been most surprised at in the work that you've done?
Oh, what have I been most surprised at? Wow, what have I been most surprised in One Last Talk, or just generally everything?
And just in the life that you've lived and the work that you've done, what's
I've been
surprised you the most?
absolutely shocked and surprised and unsurprised all at the same time about how clear people are about who they are, what they want to do, how they want to show up in the world, how they want to live, the impact they want to make, the relationships they want to have, the clarity that people have, yet they'll tell me they don't have it, the overwhelming clarity that people have. I often say people will travel thousands of miles, maybe pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to sit in a room with me for the clarity that they don't actually want. And when they get out of their own way and allow the clarity to come, the shocking accuracy of the clarity that they have continues to surprise and elate me as much as it continues to surprise and hopefully on occasion elate them as well.
Is there a touchstone? Is there a moment? Is there a pivot that you see that happens consistently when people go from that place of not knowing their clarity to knowing their clarity? And what would that pivot point be?
I think it's when they really truly begin to challenge the story, as we talked about earlier on, that they've been telling themselves. They let themselves go, and they just allow themselves to be fully seen. And often, what is required in order to get them there is there's often a trauma or some type of shame or something that sits just in the way of all of that. And when that comes out and they get beyond that, then the clarity starts to flow. It's almost they give themselves permission to name the thing that they've wanted to do for the longest time. The way I'd best describe this is it's like a wake-up call. And I can bring this back to my own life as well, rather than just making this a client story. But a wake-up call, we can have wake-up calls and do nothing in our lives, or we can have a wake-up call. And when the wake-up call comes, in my personal experience and professional experience, we simply give ourselves permission to do the things we've always wanted to do.
What was your wake-up call?
I was almost killed by an elephant in Africa many years ago. That's one. I've three specific ones.
Before you go the third one, to the second and third, when you were almost killed by an elephant, what woke up in you that you didn't know before?
I think I really do believe that I survived. I began to believe at a very, very tiny level to begin with that actually I was here for a bigger purpose. That's what woke up inside of me.
So because you were you could have seen the reality that this elephant could kill you.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was astonishing that it didn't.
And the fact that it was astonishing that it didn't. So it made you think, is there a purpose? There must be some purpose I'm here, or is there purpose, or what is the purpose? Is that what the wake up call was?
Yeah, just that I mean, as corny as cliches it might sound to some, I've been given an opportunity in this earth, and maybe it's just not the path that I had kind of intellectually planned out for myself.
Yeah,
maybe it's a different path, and that's all I can say. It was just this feeling of, why me? Why did I survive? And I was pulled out of a whitewater rafting trip and almost died, and I was semi-resuscitated on the side of the river. That was a second wake-up call. So I was slow learning the lesson. If there was a core lesson, I was very slow in some regards, but it was just this constant universal reminder that, McKernan, you're here for a bigger purpose other than the life that you think you should live.
If there was a wake-up call that would happen to you today,
yeah,
what would it be trying to tell you?
I think it would be telling me to speak more of your own individual truth.
So I'm not too far off in pushing you in this direction in this conversation.
No, I believe there's two things I'll say. One is that I think my greatest work is yet to come, but also I believe in order for that to come, I've got to stop hiding from the world. Yeah. And I have been hiding from the world my entire life. I was the guy that was never, ever, ever going to do this work. I was never going to be publicly. I had my head down, ashamed, embarrassed, and I didn't want to be seen by teachers. And my job was never going to be this. So I believe no matter who I am on this earth, at whatever point, I'm constantly continuing to hide from myself and therefore the world.
So I can only imagine the people listening, because you're elegant. I mean, I interview a lot of people. Your points are clear. You know exactly what you're doing. You know where you're going. You know what your message is. You know what you're saying. You reinforce that message all the time. And I can only imagine people listening. If this guy's hiding, what chance do I have? So what makes you still hide?
Fear of rejection, fear of people not coming, people not liking me. You know, I don't give a shit who you are and what age you are. I believe that a lot of us are still scared. I think if I could try to bring it back to it, and I'm not trying to escape from it, I'm not trying to break it with clients, but I think there's the book inside of us. There's a book that we have in our head that we think will sell and do well or make us look good. Then there's the book that just maybe is in our heart, but there's a book in our back pocket that we're afraid to take out, which is the extension of our soul. And we're afraid to write that book or share that story because it is the essence of who we are. And I find that in every walk of life. And
so could you have time out? Could you have replaced "were" with "I"? Could you, is there a
Absolutely.
book there's a book in your back pocket that you aren't writing because you're scared to write that book?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not even a book.
What would that book say? To me, it's in your back pocket. You know it.
To me, it's not even a book. It's just it's like a speech. It's a conversation. It's a thought. If I had to write a book.
You've already written it. It's in your back pocket. I'm using your words. You just haven't brought it out. What does that book say? What does that talk say? What is it that you don't want to let people know that you know you have to let people know? For those of you listening on audio, this is not a break in the sound.
No, it's not a break.
Philip is just thinking. And so I just want to keep, because if we're on video, we can see it, but on audio, we're
just giving apologies about that. But I just don't want to give you an answer. I'm working to try and allow the answer. I'm not trying to, I don't want
to. I love the space that you're taking, because it means that I've taken you to a space where you don't answer quickly, which is what you're capable of doing. So I feel it, and I want to give you all the space to have that. I just wanted to explain to people what was happening.
I mean, the first thing that comes up for me, what's emerging for me is I would probably write some type of memoir that would allow people to see the truth of my life, in order to see how fundamentally flawed I am as a human being. Because I think one of the biggest concerns, or not because it's not even a concern, but one of the things I think you brought up is that, holy shit, if you're hiding, what chance is somebody listening to this going, oh God, I read Philip's book, I've heard his talks, he's the most, this is what people say, it's not my, he's
totally, no, I'm saying it. You're an elegant, you're elegant, you're clear, you know exactly where you're going. I see your message and everything you're saying. So if you're hiding, what is it? Why are you hiding? Like, what is there? And you told me it's fear of being rejected, which is, okay, I get that. And it's also like, I don't have it's the excuse people give when they don't want to do something. I don't have the money. I don't believe you really give a darn what people think. Like, I can tell you from my personal, I'm 64 years old. I've gotten to the point where I really could care less what you think of me. If you like me, great. If you don't like me, great. You're probably wrong both ways, right? So what it allows me to do is show up authentically as myself, to challenge people, to open up to people, to love people, to vulnerably say, this imperfect human being is sitting in front of you, and how can we have a discussion that will mean something to the people that we're listening to? And how can we have a significant moment like this, which is really real? Because this is a moment for people, like there are tons of people that are scared to death to do what you've already done. And to hear now that if when they do it, they're already done, they're still going to be scared because they're going to be hiding the parts of themselves that they don't want to see, which, by the way, is what every person at Hay House did that I met with them. They would come to me and tell them their troubles because they knew I didn't want anything from them or I couldn't care less. But they built a public persona of who they were that was different than the personal persona of who they are. And they had to maintain that public persona. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying that's what they do. Mm. But that sense of I have to hide something. You're a powerful man. You don't have to hide anything.
No, I don't think I'm hiding anything. Because that feels like it's very conscious. I'm consciously trying to hide from the world. Yeah. It feels like there's an integrity issue there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, because if you talk to anybody who works with me, they go, oh my God, he's obscenely open. Like he talks
I appreciate that distinction. And I get that from you.
Every challenge that I have, I open up with clients personally, and I'll open up today if you ask me about anything in my life.
And you have. And you have. So I'm mirroring back the words that I think I heard you say.
Yeah, just a part of me that I feel like there's just more, and that's a great, to me. That's I pose this question to clients, but I also pose this question to myself. And there's a part of me that gets so excited. Is your greatest work yet to come? And I know that my greatest work is yet to come. My greatest extension of who I am, my expression, whatever you want to call that, is yet to come. So therefore, there's a curiosity rather than a judgment that comes with that. And on occasion, maybe it's judgment as well. But that is like, okay, so what part of you has to emerge in order for you to get to a point where you feel like everything's on the ice? And I've never met a human being, ever, once in my entire life, that shows up 100% authentic as it relates to their own life. There's always a part of them that they're just not even hiding, they're just not shining a light on because they don't think it has value in the world. And yet that's the very thing that does have value. To me,
stop. Because I want to get away from, I appreciate you. I love you. And I'm pushing you hard. I want you to shine that light on that place in you where you're doing that and tell me what that is right here, right now.
Well, I think for me, I've chosen not to share. So at the beginning, I talked a lot about my story. Then I moved away from my story completely. And now what I'm hearing more and more people saying, I want to hear more about you. I don't want to hear about your teaching. I want to hear more about you.
Yeah.
And I've chosen to not share that, partially because I didn't think it had value, which I think is an excuse, and partially because I was afraid I was protecting people. So I don't think people know to the full extent, the pain and the anguish and the joy that I had in my life, mainly pain and anguish. So I think I'm still hiding a lot of that from the world. I'm not allowing the world to see that. And it's, I think people that are close to me see that. I also think, here's something else. So, and this may or may not answer your question. I did a body of work last summer, and I only invited people who'd been on a Brave Soul, which is a week-long experience I run, to come back. I'd never felt safer in an environment in my life. Actually, I think this is what's emerging. And what happened in that, and I've never shared this publicly, what happened in that room is there's 20 people in the room, and I'm sharing this story. And if this man ever hears it, I'm not using his name. I'm sharing this for a purpose, even though I don't know what that is right now. But what ended up happening is, in the midst of this 5-6 day deep immersive experience, which is all about showing up and allowing yourself to be seen and finding your voice, this man said, why does my mother keep coming back into my life? Why does she keep emerging back into my life? And I said, tell me about that. And he said, my mother's passed away. So what haunted him, he doesn't have an opportunity in his mind at this moment to actually solve this or close it or create clarity around it or address it. And I just said, what's emerging? He says, I just can't shake this idea that my mother never loved me.
Wow.
She's never loved me. And he had all the data points to prove the stuff she said, the cruel things she said, the things she didn't say. When he did something well, she never congratulated him. When he was trying to do something right and got it wrong, she would nail him on that. And before you know it, there's like this, I don't know how to best describe this because I haven't sat to articulate this, and I haven't spoken much about it at all. So suddenly there's this tunnel between myself and himself. The only person on earth in that moment is him. I'm not even in the room. And the other 19 people just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, his mother enters the room. She doesn't just enter the room, she enters me. She's literally inside me. And she says, but I loved you so much. I just didn't know how to show you. And I wasn't even sitting there changing words or anything. It just came out. And it came out in exactly this. I said, and what happened? And again, I'm fast forward, and this is a 10-minute conversation. Felt like 5 hours, but maybe 6-7 minutes. I said to him, well, what if she loved you? And for his entire life, he has held this idea and belief that his mother did not love him and therefore probably did not want him. How is this connected to him amplifying his voice and showing up in the world? And him, can I show you in a spreadsheet? No, but I know it's a huge
100%
connection.
100%.
And he put his head down and he lifted his head with tears pouring down his face. And he looked at me, he goes, I know she loved me. And then the next thing that happened was just beyond description. And then through me, she just basically said, and you were my favorite.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I said, and what if she was what if you were her favorite?
Wow.
And he had his head like this and he lifted his head and he looked at me and he goes, I know I was.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now, I've heard little gasps and different things like, wow, or whatever. I've heard that in the room.
Yeah.
There was 19 people just went, oh, and literally just were speechless.
Yeah, totally.
I let it go for another 10, 15, 20 seconds. And then I stopped. And then I burst into tears. And I'm not talking like a couple of tears. I'm talking about cried like I haven't cried since I was a child. Cried and cried and cried. They held the space for me. And then I wasn't embarrassed. I allowed them to keep me safe. And then I said, guys, I have to be excused. And I walked down the road and I put my head in the ocean, in the Atlantic, the wide Atlantic Ocean. And I came back to the room, and then I heard things like people said they came all the way to Ireland, not for me. They came all the way to Ireland just to be in a room where that happened.
Yeah, 100%.
That's something I'm hiding from.
Yeah.
That's something I'm scared of.
Yeah.
Because, and I know I have it within me, whatever you want to call it, and I don't want to label it. I don't want to put a name on it.
Yeah.
Because I think that's disrespectful. But there's something inside of me and it's emerging, but it's almost like I have a foot on the brake and a foot on the accelerator at the same time. And that's the best example I can give you. That normally I wouldn't allow that to escalate to that level.
Yeah. And now it makes sense to me when you say you believe your best work is ahead of you. Mm. And the work that you have to do is really right in front of you, because everything you've done is as incredible as it's been, doesn't even hold a candle to that will come through you when you, to me, I'm just like, I'm right here in the tunnel with you right this minute. Take it with a grain of salt. I say trash can rule in effect. If what I'm saying makes sense, keep it. If not, just throw it right into the trash. But I believe that part of you, that's what inspired me to talk to you. But you have some rough edges around you that protects you from being that person. And you're like even when I said, I want you to be on in the podcast, your notes back said, well, we're not going to promote this to our people. We're not going to do anything as long as you know, like it was all this stuff of what you're not going to do. Right. And I could care less. I wasn't asking you to do any of that. I just wanted to get a chance to meet you because I had this conversation with Srini about this guy who might close, or I might close, because he just thought there was this power in both of us that he really respected. And I just wanted to meet you. Right. But there was all these sort of confines that I had to get through to get to that person. And I believe that those confines exist. If they exist one place, they exist everywhere. And you're so light. You have so much power. You have so much love in you. You have so much grace in you. You have so much power that you have to be brave because you matter. I keep looking at that sign right behind you, right? That just says, be brave, you matter. And we come up with the logos and the sayings that are meant for us. I wrote the Mosaic because I needed to read it. What you explained is the ultimate connection. When we are connected, That's what happens. What the information that comes through us has nothing to do with us. It comes from all sorts of places. We're able to bring the mother of the child. I felt that before you even said it. I was going to say to you, what if those are just his stories, and and she loved him more than he could ever imagine, and she didn't know how to love him in the way he wanted to be loved. And then you said it, but it was just like instinctively, I could feel that. Instinctively, you feel that.
Yeah. The other thing for me as well is I literally I feel the future for people. And
Yeah.
I have reluctantly stayed away from allowing, so I meet people and I can literally see where they're going to be. I can predict what's going to happen. I can see the future. Even from a very young child, I could do this. And
Yep.
I would bring it up with my parents and I would share different things and I get shut down.
Of course. Of course.
So that's the burden that I feel that I carry as a result of that. And I think the burden is there because I haven't allowed that. It's not even a body of work. I haven't allowed that to show up in the world,
Yeah.
and just to allow it to emerge. And that's something that, to be fair, I can judge myself for it, but to be fair, it's happening. And even people who know me very well just said to watch your acceleration over the last 24 months, never mind 5 years, is amazing to watch. But it's scary at the same time.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I want to be sensitive to our time because we're past where I told you I was going to let you
No,
off
I'm
earlier.
okay. I'm okay. I've got a call in 22 minutes.
Okay. I think what we've got with the place we've gotten to is an amazing place. I think that for people listening, I think this has been such a fruitful conversation. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting outside of the realm of, even though there isn't clients, different children, people, me, we're all the same. There is an area. It's that book in the back pocket that we got out today. That was not what your clients do, even though it is what your clients do. And it's not what your kids do, even though it is what your kids do. It's this place where all of us, no matter how far along we are in our messaging and stories and how much we lead other people to that place, are still looking at the demons that we have in ourselves that keep us from being completely authentic and completely real, not because we're hiding something. Like, I've so appreciated your distinction. I'm not consciously, maliciously hiding something. No. It's just right, because that's not who you are. You can feel it in your smile. You can see it in your eyes. You can feel it in just the way you speak, that's the furthest thing from your intention. But this idea of holding a governor onto the car that can go so fast, holding the governor that says, I want to control this because I'm scared to death of what happens when it gets out of my control. Like, if I show up as this, what will that be for me? And how will people respond? And that's something that everybody listening deals with. And so I appreciate you being vulnerable and honest enough to share you doing that too, because it touches me. Let me come to a place where this is the way I close every conversation that I have on here. And so I just want to get your sense. When you look out the window at the world that exists right now, is this the world you always dreamed of giving over to your children and to your children's children?
No.
So 97% of the people that I ask say no. What I would like to know is, what would be one thing that you could offer people that if they were to do that along with you doing it, the answer to the question might be lean a little more in the favor of yes, because if we don't do anything, this is the world we're going to give over to our kids, right?
The only thing I feel I can influence and not control at all, but the only thing I can influence is, in 10 years from now, I hope I'm looking at that window saying absolutely hell yes. Cool. And the only thing I can describe, the only thing, and this is something that I feel very deep inside of myself, is I don't believe, and I say this with respect to people who are out there running, environmental studies and trying to, clean up the oceans. It's not that I disagree with any of those things. There's so many people doing that. That's great. And people who want to change the political landscape. The only thing I believe I can influence, and therefore in turn offer to my children, is how their dad showed up in the world. And I feel that if I can allow myself and continue to allow myself to my greatest work to continue to show up, in other words, the essence of myself to show up,
Yeah.
I think what it'll do is indirectly inspire my kids and give them permission to do the same. And that is my sole focus. I do not believe politics changes the world. I do not believe a lot of the things that we focus on will change the world. I think we can change our own worlds and therefore allow people to decide whether that will influence them or not. So my job is and my wish, and it feels very invitational, is that I want to show up to the fullest expression as I can. And if I can do that, I have to trust that my kids are going to be far better and far better equipped to handle the world that they're going to inhabit.
Totally. Philip, for people who want to, I can't imagine someone is not going to want to get in touch with you. How do they find you? And we'll put all this in the show notes too.
philipmckernan.com. And the thing I'm most excited about in many ways is onelasttalk.com as well, where they can look at the One Last Talk movement, and if they're drawn to it, by the book, and at least do their one last talk to one other human being and free themselves of their story and gift it to the world.
Fabulous. I just want to summarize by sharing with the listeners and with you, Philip, how touched I was by this conversation. I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know. I didn't know if I was going to have the ability to do what I instinctively felt that I wanted to do, which is actually like just hug your heart and hold you and love you and give you the space to open to me in a way that, and to the listeners here in a way that it's hard for people to do sometimes, not necessarily you, but people in general. And I just want to say that, again, like Mo walking on his journey and sitting and seeing a person on the street, just having this one conversation, short time, about an hour long, right? The person that I walk away from is so different than the person that I initially came to see. And I think that if we can just have conversations, I remember in my first podcast, I interviewed a homeless guy who was an empath. And he could feel the hatred of people walking by him, saying how much they hated him and the scorn that they were putting on him. And he thought, boy, well, I don't even want their money. I don't want to take what's been infused with that hatred. So, but what I can do is I can pray for them. And I can just sit here and pray for them. And over time, what happened is people, instead of just walking by, stopped. And they would stay there and linger with them. And then over time, what happened is those same people would bring pictures of people that they felt needed prayers. They didn't even know he was praying for them. They would bring pictures of people that they felt needed prayers and put them by his hat with $1 in it, and say, will you pray for this person? And so it just and I asked him, what would you do? And the same question I asked you. And he said, if people only knew the power of a 10-minute conversation, 10 minutes in the course of a lifetime is not a whole lot. If we would just spend 10 minutes with someone we don't know, the world that we would see would be entirely different. And so I thank you for spending these 10 minutes plus with me and opening up to the world that is our world together, and sharing with me something about yourself that you, even in the course of the conversation, said, I don't share this much with people. It's my honor to hold that space for you, and it's my honor that you walked into it. And I appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So for those of you who want to hear more conversations like this, you can subscribe on YouTube to, on iTunes to the Mosaic Podcast. Please get Philip's book. Please go to his website. Please take a look at everything he's doing. And also, if you're inspired by these conversations, check out themosaiconline.com. Buy the book, The Mosaic, on Amazon. And until next time, stay connected, live connected, and thank you so much for being here with us.